As the U.S. Supreme Court hears arguments on one of the toughest anti-immigration laws in U.S. history, how will the issue play out in the 2012 campaign? You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. 2 years ago, Arizona's governor signed into law a measure requiring police to check the immigration status of anyone they suspected of being an undocumented immigrant. The move ignited a political firestorm, with critics arguing the legislation encouraged racial profiling. The Department of Justice challenged the measure, and a federal court issued an injunction that blocked the law's most controversial provisions. Now it will be up to the United States Supreme Court to decide whether Arizona was acting within its rights or overriding federal policy. But whatever happens, immigration will be one of the hot-button issues come the election in November. Let's have a look at the most controversial provisions of the Arizona law being considered by the court. They include a requirement for law enforcement officers to check the immigration status of anyone they stop. It makes it an offense not to carry an immigrant registration document, and it creates rules that prevent undocumented immigrants obtaining work. Al Jazeera's Rob Reynolds has been in Arizona looking at what effect the law has had on the ground.
This is one of the largest Latino neighborhoods in Tucson, Arizona. Now, ever since this state passed a stringent anti-illegal immigrant bill 2 years ago, many migrants who are undocumented and living here have either left or say that they are living in a kind of climate of fear. They're afraid to go outside. A lot of people tell us that they have restricted their movements basically to going to work, sending their children to school, maybe going to church every week, but otherwise they stay home. Other people here who are legal residents of the United States or even U.S. citizens who've been here for many years say that they've also been stopped by police and questioned about whether they are legally resident in this country. 5 states have passed similar bills to Arizona's in the 2 years after Arizona's passage of its law. There may be other states that will follow suit once the Supreme Court rules, if the Supreme Court does rule in Arizona's favor.
A little earlier, I spoke to Arizona Democratic Congressman Raul Grijalva outside the U.S. Supreme Court, where he'd been watching proceedings. I asked him for his thoughts on which side the court could come down.
My feeling is that the same feeling I had going in, that this case is going to be a very close decision by this court. I thought the arguments the government made on terms of this being a federal responsibility, the effect on foreign relations for this nation, I thought those arguments were well. I thought the questioning by some of the justices, particularly Justice Sotomayor, were to the point on the issue of what impact it would have on a community, what impact it would have on law enforcement. The counter arguments by Scalia and others were that there was nothing wrong, that they were merely implementing a federal law. And I think those are the 2 points that are going to be argued. I didn't see a majority either way, and at least that's my reading. You know, I feel the same coming out as I went in. A great deal of apprehension about what this precedent's going to be, and a great deal of concern for the impact if the Ninth Circuit decision to enjoin this is not upheld.
Congressman, when President Obama was campaigning for office, he promised significant immigration reform. Why has he done nothing while he's in the White House?
Nothing's been done because Congress has not done anything. That is a responsibility of Congress. If, you know, I think if it was up to President Obama to wave a magic wand and get comprehensive immigration reform done, if it was up to me to do that, we would have done it. We operated a democracy, and in this democracy, unfortunately, the counter-prevailing view is in charge, and that is all they want to talk about is enforcement, and all they want to talk about is self-deportation. As long as that's the political culture, passing comprehensive reform was tough and will continue to be tough.
There are many opinion polls in the United States that tell us that most Americans support what is happening in Arizona right now. So is Congress out of step with the voters?
No, I think let's look at opinion polls. The opinion poll that says, you ask the opinion polls, 70% of American people say they don't want amnesty. 70% of the people think that everybody should be registered. But if you ask the American people, what if there's a family that's played by the rules, works hard, pays their taxes, has family in this country, should they be given an opportunity to make their status legal? 70% of the people say it's okay. So it depends how you read and how you ask that question.
So, should Arizona's tough anti-immigration law stand? And more generally, how tough should the U.S. government be on immigration? To discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by Tamar Jacoby, a Republican and the president of Immigration Works USA. Mark Krikorian, the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies. And from Phoenix, we're joined by Alessandra Soler-Meetz, who is the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union Arizona chapter. Thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Mark Krikorian, let me start with you. This law has been called racist, it's been called draconian, it's been called unlawful, illegal, etc. You support the law. Tell us why.
Well, I mean, I support it, but at the same time, it's not even that big a deal, honestly. I mean, it's become a big deal, but the individual provisions of it just aren't as consequential as people imagine. This idea that the police being able to check your immigration status if they have reason to suspect you're illegally in the country is something that happens every day, everywhere. I mean, this is really more codifying, at least parts of it are more codifying what is already standard practice in much of the country. So honestly, if this law had gone into effect without all of the fuss, you wouldn't really have known about it. And if it's upheld by the Supreme Court, and most of it is guaranteed to be upheld by the Supreme Court, I mean, I'll bet you lunch on that, Anand, if you'd like, it's not going to make that much difference. It's the political effect of it is very significant, not really the substance of the law.
I'll get to you right now, Tamar. I'm not a gambling man. I just want to add that in there. I just want to go to Alessandra out there in Phoenix. Alessandra, we just heard there it's not a big deal.
Right. Well, I would certainly disagree with Mark. I think if Mark lived here in Arizona, and he would have a very different opinion of that, because it has been a big deal for our state. It has been a big deal for the many of the Latino U.S. citizens who have been stopped and questioned and been forced to prove their immigration status after this law was passed. And I think the reality is that if this law does go into effect, it would mean that those 1.2 million Latinos who live in the state of Arizona are going to be presumed guilty. They're going to be presumed as suspected immigrants, and they are, in order to have to avoid arrest, going to have to carry their papers at all time. And you know, this type of tactic, this is a tactic that is associated with police states, not certainly a free country like we have here in the United States.
Tamar, we've heard all kinds of views on this particular issue. That there is a need for reform is not in dispute. I think everybody agrees on that. But does this particular legislation go too far?
What Mark's leaving out, yes, I would argue. And what Mark's leaving out, he's taking a magnifying glass and he's looking at this piece and that piece. Of course it's reasonable that people should carry papers. Of course it's reasonable that police should be involved in enforcing the law. What he's leaving out is the theory behind the Arizona legislation, which is attrition through enforcement. These are people who've come to work in the United States over the past 3 decades because of our hypocrisy. We said we need you to do work, but we gave them no legal way to come. That's like 2 signs at the border, one that says keep out and one that says help wanted. So people came to work, and now we're saying the way we're going to deal with the consequences of that hypocrisy, our hypocrisy, is we're going to make life so miserable for you that you voluntarily pack up and go home. I don't think that's an honorable way to deal with it. That is the avowed theory behind the Arizona law, and I don't think that's the way America wants to deal with this problem. We have a problem left over from our past, but let's deal with it in a straight up way, in a decent way, not attrition through enforcement.
Mark, hypocritical?
Yeah, well, I invented attrition through enforcement as an idea. I'll take credit for it. No, the answer is no, it's not hypocritical. And let me first address the idea of attrition through enforcement, which is in the second sentence of the law. And the point of it is that the way you deal with the illegal immigrant population is not that you're going to arrest all of them. I mean, that's just practically. Some of them you're going to arrest and deport, but generally speaking, most of them you're just not going to be able to arrest. But the only alternative to that is not legalizing them all. It's making it impractical to live here as an illegal immigrant. That's the whole point. So that you can't get a job and a driver's license and what have you, so that some substantial portion of those who are here illegally will give up and go home. And we've actually seen hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants either leave states that have laws like this to go to other states that are more illegal immigrant friendly, or go back to Mexico or other countries.
Again,
We've seen that.
Think what that means.
Yeah, but I mean, you talk about practical circumstances. I mean, in practical terms, what happens to, look at some of the industries in the United States that depend on undocumented workers, farming, for instance, the construction industry, the hospitality industry, the transport sector.
There's a couple of issues here. First, no substantial occupation in the United States is dominated by the foreign-born. I'm not talking even about illegal immigrants, I'm talking about immigrants in general. Specific narrow slices of particular industries are in fact heavily
that's just not
immigrant
true.
dependent.
That's just not true.
Okay.
That's just not true.
Tamar?
75% of the farm workers in labor-intensive agriculture are unauthorized
And
immigrants
that's the
by
kind
estimates.
of narrow
And
slice I'm talking
That's not
about.
a narrow slice.
Yeah, sure it is.
And
one.
look in the back rooms of restaurants, and look at construction, and look at food processing. No, there are Americans working in some of these jobs, but in particular places where there are not available Americans, many plants are dominated by, and many restaurants are dominated by immigrants.
And so
Okay, let's get Alessandra in here. Go ahead.
In those states, well, yeah, I mean, I think what we're missing, the big pieces here is, regardless of the Supreme Court's decision, there are numerous states, including states like Alabama, that have realized that they made a mistake. I mean, here you have high-ranking executives of Mercedes, Japanese workers who were here lawfully, who were being questioned and detained and arrested. They realized that the consequences, the economic consequences, were devastating, and they're having essentially buyer's remorse. And I think that's an important message. I mean, we have states like Mississippi and Tennessee who also realize this as a policy, SB 1070, as a policy matter, is a failed experiment. It's costly to implement, it's divisive, and it's un-American. And so I think that's extremely important, is that regardless of what the Supremes say, this is not a good policy, and it diverts, more importantly as a practical matter, it diverts police resources, scarce police resources, to going after people who fail to carry their registration documents, rather than the people who really pose the threats to public safety.
You know, Alessandra, what do you make of this? The advocate for the states, and there are 26 states involved in this, says that Arizona and other states are addressing what he termed an emergency situation marked by rampant illegal entries and cross-border smuggling.
I mean, I think that the reality is that in Arizona, we have seen a dramatic, FBI records, Arizona records show there has been a dramatic decrease in crime. Obviously, border security is a concern, and it's critical. The United States, we support the United States' right to control its borders and determine who should be entering the country. But the reality is SB 1070 does absolutely nothing to address border security. It forces police to go after, stop and question and detain people who don't have their documentation. And so again, what that does is it forces us to divert resources to false security threats.
Anand, can I jump in here about some of the specifics of the law? And there's some exaggeration here. One, police have considerable discretion in whether or not, even under this law, in whether or not they want to pursue this issue of looking into your legal status. In other words, the law specifically says it has to be practicable in not interfere with other investigations. So the police have discretion, number one. Number two, under this law, if you have an Arizona driver's license or an Arizona non-driver ID that the DMV would issue, that's the end of the story. You're already required by federal. You're already required by federal law to always carry your green card with you.
But Mark, even the Supreme Court.
Let Alessandra go ahead. Alessandra, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the reality, Mark, is that the Supreme Court even had concerns about the impact on citizens and non-citizens and potential civil rights violations. It means me, if I'm driving to the store and I forget my driver's license at home, and I happen to be listening to Latino radio, which I listen to all the time, and I get pulled over, that could be, under this law, reasonable suspicion that I'm here unlawfully, which means I could be subjected to questioning and detention. And the Supreme Court even raised questions about that, is that what will will happen when an officer who maybe, there is some question and they put in a request to the federal government to confirm whether or not I'm here lawfully, and that means I'm going to be detained throughout that period. I could be detained for hours on the side of the road until they figure it out. And so I think that is what is so dangerous. And I disagree with Mark about the discretion piece. There is language in there that mandates that anytime there's contact, not just in the criminal context, but in the civil context, we're talking about a noise dispute. Anytime the police officer comes into contact with somebody, they're mandated to question them about their status if they have, quote, reasonable suspicion that that person is here unlawfully. And I have not heard any good, legitimate, legal explanation of what reasonable suspicion means other than targeting people based on whether or not they look or sound foreign.
Isn't there a murky line here between crime prevention and enforcing immigration laws?
Well, again, most immigrants, unauthorized immigrants here to work, do everything possible to not run afoul of the law in any other way. Right. They're afraid of running afoul of the law. They came here to work. They're often working 2 and 3 jobs. They're supporting their families. They're often sending money home. The last thing they want to do is get in trouble with the law. It is a problem for the country that we have 11 million people here living outside the law. I mean, let's be honest about that. But again, I would argue that the way to deal with it, again, since they're here partly through our hypocrisy or entirely through our hypocrisy, is not to harass them until they leave. People who've lived here for often more than 10 years, who have families, who are rooted, who have been working, for the law, the power of the law to start to harass them, we ought to own up to our past mistake and give them a way to get right with the law.
Okay, well, let's just look at where this features in politics, especially now that we have a presidential election coming up. Now, a recent poll suggests that a substantial majority of Americans support Arizona's immigration law. Among voters of all parties, 65% said they are in favor of the law, with 31% opposing it. Republicans support the law more strongly by a margin of 84% to 13%, with Tea Party supporters slightly higher at 87%. Democrats surveyed that they are against the law, but not by a large margin. 46% backed the provisions of the Arizona law, with 51% in opposition. Independent voters, a crucial constituency, of course, in November's presidential election, also support the law, 67% to 27%.
I think that goes back to our first exchange. If you ask people what do they think about police asking people for papers, a lot of people will say, yes, we believe in that. If you say, do you believe using all of the power of the law to harass people to leave the country, I think most Americans would say no.
Well, actually, I mean, we've actually polled that exact issue, and we've offered people these very options without using code words, without saying illegal alien, without using the word amnesty, and we've said, how do you think we'd want to deal with the illegal immigrants who are already here?
Harass them until they go home?
Yeah, we said should the laws be enforced consistently to make people leave over time? Should they be able to earn legal status, which is Tamar's preferred approach, or should there be large-scale roundups and mass deportations?
Well, when you put it that way, people pick a middle course.
But even if you leave it out, it's 2 to 1. Yeah. It's 2 to 1 against so-called comprehensive immigration.
I have a higher opinion of Americans than that. I think if you ask it clearly.
Tamar a couple times has made this point about we're sort of obliged because of our own hypocrisy created this problem. That's not true. I'm not the one who invited illegal immigrants here. The public didn't invite illegal immigrants here. It's those who are obstructing immigration enforcement who created this problem and now turn around and say, look, we have so many illegal aliens here.
Let me finish. Lettuce every day,
let me finish the
go
thought,
to restaurants.
They say, look, they created the problem and then say, wow, look, we can't do anything about it. It's such a big problem. It's like someone who kills his parents and then asks for mercy in front of the court because he's an orphan.
That's ridiculous.
Okay, let's look at how this is.
I do think we have an obligation.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I mean, I do think we have an obligation to try to approach this problem of immigration in a fair and humane and a just way. And SB 1070 and these copycat measures is not the answer to the problem. And scare tactics and myths and the rhetoric that we're hearing about, the Arizona being this sort of ground zero. I think we have to approach it in a balanced way, and we have to approach it in a way that respects the constitutional rights of the people that are living in this state and in this country.
We don't want to be a country with a policy that harasses people because they look different.
All right, I want to get back to the politics of the situation.
The way they look. That's not what it is.
Let's look at
trying to steal a base here.
How this is playing out on the campaign trail. Immigration was a frequent topic, of course, in the Republican presidential debates. Now, at the debate held in Arizona in February, Mitt Romney came out strongly in favor of the initiative. That
he
is,
did, actually didn't. If you listen carefully,
well,
he came out in favor of the
Earlier
Arizona
law.
E-Verify law.
Okay, well, let's watch what he has to
If you
say.
read the language.
If it's very
Let's watch
clear.
this.
The right course for America is to drop these lawsuits against Arizona and other states that are trying to do the job Barack Obama isn't doing, and I will drop those lawsuits on day one. I'll also complete the fence. I'll make sure we have enough Border Patrol agents to secure the fence.
And hasn't his opinion changed? It's now a little bit more nuanced, isn't it?
Well, he's always said, look, I mean, let's be clear. Mitt Romney has gotten off on the wrong foot with Latinos. Latinos care about many issues. Immigration is not the only one. They're like most of us. They care about the economy, and then maybe education.
Right.
But the way Mitt Romney has handled himself on immigration, it's a little bit like someone coming to your door to sell you something and starting out with, I don't really like people like you.
Yeah.
And that is not really a good way to make the sale. And he is in a place where he needs to do something about that. The Republican Party needs to do something about that. He's always said for a legal immigration system that works, and that is the most important thing going forward, is a legal immigration system that works. And so, I think Romney needs to do something about his likability and first impression problem with Latinos. But then I think if he could talk about the things that Republicans can give Latinos, which is an economy that works and answers for small business people and a legal immigration system that works.
Okay, well, let's ask Alessandra, is that the way forward for Mitt Romney?
She's not interested in giving advice.
Well, I think unfortunately, I agree with Tamara that he started off on the wrong foot. I mean, I think at one point, if I remember correctly, during the debate, he supported Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who is going to be going to trial in a lawsuit that we filed at the ACLU over allegations of racial profiling of Latinos. And so, I think unfortunately he adopted some of this extremist rhetoric and rhetoric that politicians like Russell Pierce, who calls himself the architect of SB 1070, he faced tremendous consequences. I mean, Russell Pierce became the first sitting senator to be recalled. And so, again, I think he is going to have to be presenting some sort of a workable solutions that I think address these sort of competing interests.
Well, I mean,
I really need to jump in here.
Yeah?
First of all, I don't work for Romney. I'm not here to speak for the guy. But number one, the ACLU isn't the right place to get advice from for a Republican candidate, honestly. And the other thing is, he has a reputation for, flip-flopping and changing his views and all that. This is one of the things where he really hasn't flip-flopped, even now. When he was governor, he fought against an in-state tuition bill for illegal immigrants. He developed a state agreement with the feds for the state police to work cooperatively on immigration issues. So he's actually been not only consistent, but reasonably nuanced. He has talked about going after employers, making it hard
I'm not saying he should flip-flop. I'm saying that his position, I'm in favor of enforcement. I'm in favor of a process for I'm not saying that unauthorized people here should just get amnesty, but he could be in favor of some of the things he's in favor of without gratuitously embracing some people who send an extreme message.
Okay, let's go to Alessandra. What about the president's record on this? I mean, he made these promises when he was running for office, when he was running for the White House. He hasn't really stepped up to the plate as far as those promises are concerned.
Well, I think, unfortunately, first of all, the administration, they should certainly be commended for filing challenges against these laws, including SB 1070. But I think the reality of the matter is that SB 1070 was the culmination of a series of state and federal programs, many federal programs that have led to rampant civil rights abuses in Arizona. In Arizona, we continue to see record numbers of deportations and of detentions, especially in the context of detentions. The majority of the people that are detained here in Arizona are there for non-criminal violations of immigration law. He has since expanded programs like Secure Community, Secure Communities. He's expanded that to all of the counties in Arizona, which we believe really create this incentive for local police to engage in racial profiling. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done.
All right.
The problem with the way Obama approach and I would say the Republican approach is the way everybody has politicized this issue. 5 or 6 years ago, this was a problem to be solved, a thorny issue with hard moral questions that requires compromises for the nation to go forward.
Okay.
Instead of making those kind of compromises, it's become a political football and a wedge issue with both parties
But especially in an
play
election
with
year.
both
The fact
parties
is, though,
You get the last
the
word.
fact is, it is a wedge issue, and the reason is it's not a right-left issue. Immigration is an up-down issue. It's elites versus the public. And Tamar and Alessandra are on opposite parties, but are on the same side of this issue, and that really exemplifies the problem, is that when we talk about a bipartisan immigration approach, usually it's pro-amnesty
Way
Republicans and
oversimplifies
pro-amnesty
it.
Democrats getting it together to push an
I-
amnesty.
I'm afraid that's where we're going to have to leave it. Time's caught up with us. Alessandra Soler-Meetz in Phoenix, Mark Krikorian, Tamar Jacoby. Thanks
Thank you.
to all of you
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
Thank you.
And that is it from the team here in Washington, D.C. for now. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, where you can find more information about the program. And of course, we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. Send your ideas directly to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching.